The clattering sound came from the darkness. The clock read 2 in the morning. My office should have been locked tight. My wife Eleanor had passed away 3 years earlier. That room still held everything that belonged to her. Her blueprints, journals, and even the steel box containing the inheritance documents. It was sacred ground. But tonight someone had used a duplicate key to break into my fortress. The original key was still in my jacket pocket. Whoever this was had been preparing for this quietly for a long time. Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. Grab a drink, a few snacks, get comfortable, and remember this. The people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing. They simply chose not to. Leave comment number 1 so we can begin the story, and do not forget to subscribe. You are going to love how this one ends. I moved lightly across the wooden floor. The familiar creaks had long ago been eliminated by walking close to the walls. One advantage of being an architect is knowing every inch of the house you built with your own hands. I cracked the door open. The glow from a phone screen illuminated Chloe's face. My sweet, polite daughter-in-law. The woman who always claimed she did not care about money. Yet at that moment her eyes gleamed with reckless greed. Her hands hurried through stacks of blueprints. She was searching for the inheritance provisions meant for Ethan, my son. I stood in suffocating silence, watching my daughter-in-law rummage through my late wife's legacy with a stolen key. The sense of betrayal and insult shot down my spine like electricity. The family structure I had worked so hard to protect was being hollowed out from within by a parasite. She was not just searching through paperwork. She was trampling on Eleanor's memory. She was putting a price on this house, a price on my life, and a price on my son's love. Rage swelled inside my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. A crack in a wall cannot be repaired by smashing it apart. I needed to know how deep it went. I did not turn on the lights. I did not storm in shouting. I simply stood there, blending into the darkness, watching the naked truth unfold. Chloe let out a sigh of relief when she found the blue folder. She raised her phone and photographed every page. Each click of the camera felt like a hammer, striking the last remnants of my patience. She had no idea that the core blueprint of this house had already been changed, and the trap designed for her greed had officially been set in motion. The blue glow from Chloe's phone screen suddenly disappeared. Darkness quickly swallowed the office once again. She tiptoed out of the room. I stepped deeper into a recess in the hallway. As I watched her silhouette glide past, a chill settled in my chest. Betrayal always begins with the smallest cracks. I followed her with my eyes, and my mind drifted back to a year earlier, to the day this woman first entered my family. It was an autumn evening. Ethan had brought his girlfriend home to meet me. I had prepared a warm dinner. I wanted to welcome the woman who might spend the rest of her life with my son. But a seasoned architect does not judge by glossy paint on the surface. He studies the foundation. From the moment Chloe stepped through the front door, she revealed the instincts of someone who measured value. She did not pause to look at the family photographs filled with memories. Instead, her eyes swept across the decorative moldings on the ceiling. She lightly tapped a solid oak column with her fingers, as though estimating the thickness of the wealth behind it. My discomfort began to grow during dinner. The moment Ethan stepped away to the kitchen for more water, Chloe's mask slipped. She did not ask about my health. She did not ask about Ethan's life. Her first question caught me completely off guard. She asked about the property taxes in the neighborhood. She wanted to know how much it cost to maintain the house. Then, in a casual tone, she began probing into my investments. She wanted to know how many shares I still owned in my former architectural firm. I sat quietly, studying every small movement. There was no warmth in her eyes, no sign of someone deeply in love. There was only the cold calculation of a business person evaluating a profitable opportunity. Ethan returned to the table, wearing his innocent smile. My son was completely blinded by love. He could not see the monster sitting across from him. A deep sense of unease crawled down my spine. A foundation built on endless greed can never support true happiness. That night, after they left, I stood alone on the balcony for a long time. I knew a storm was moving toward this house. Chloe had not come to become a homemaker or a devoted wife. She had come to become an economic parasite. She wanted to possess everything Eleanor and I had spent a lifetime building. What I never anticipated was how quickly her boldness would grow. The probing questions at dinner had evolved into something far worse. Now she had been standing inside my office with a stolen key. After Chloe returned to her room, I went back into my office. I opened the hidden drawer beneath my desk. The blue folder she had just photographed was nothing more than bait. She believed she had finally uncovered the secrets of this family's wealth. But she had no idea that the moment she pressed the shutter button for the final photograph, she had personally signed her own eviction order. I lowered myself into the worn leather chair and ran my fingers across the wooden surface of the desk. This room had once been filled with Eleanor's laughter. She had been a gentle woman, but her instincts were as precise as a compass. 15 years earlier, when the cruel disease first began to consume her body, Eleanor had taken my hand. She looked directly into my eyes and spoke words that remained carved into my memory to this day. She told me that the greatest asset I would ever possess was not the buildings I had constructed, but Ethan's safety. My grief for Eleanor mixed with my anger toward Chloe, creating a storm inside me. I could not allow my wife's legacy to fall into the hands of a predator. After the dinner, when I first saw through Chloe's true nature, I knew I could not sit back and do nothing. A good architect always designs a backup support system capable of withstanding the strongest shocks. I decided to build a legal fortress to protect my son. Over the following week, I worked closely with the family attorney. Together, we established an irrevocable trust and an airtight prenuptial agreement. Many people would have called me paranoid. Others would have said I was interfering with my son's happiness. But 4 decades in the construction industry had taught me a painful lesson. Kindness without steel boundaries is simply weakness waiting to be exploited. I was willing to play the role of the controlling father, if it meant Ethan would remain protected. The prenuptial agreement was designed like a bulletproof shield. It completely separated my family's assets from their marriage. If the relationship ever collapsed, Chloe would not receive a single dollar from the trust or this house. I knew Ethan would object if he learned about it. My son was too kind, too trusting, so I quietly included a special provision within the documents. A provision that could only take effect with my written approval. I stared at the steel box Chloe had searched through moments earlier. She was probably celebrating right now, convinced she had uncovered every secret surrounding my wealth. She believed those documents were her ticket into a world of privilege she had never earned. But she was hopelessly inexperienced compared to a man who had spent a lifetime calculating risks and reading intentions. She had no idea that the pages she photographed contained a trap hidden in plain sight. I rose from my chair and walked to the window. Across the courtyard stood the building where Ethan and Chloe were staying. The light in their room was still on. I knew Chloe was busy sending those photographs to someone. My fortress had already been designed, and Chloe had just stepped into its most dangerous chamber. A faint smile crossed my face as I stood in the darkness. This game had only begun, and Chloe's next move would push her own marriage toward a tragedy from which there would be no return. That was when I finally realized something terrifying. Chloe did not just want my money. She wanted to destroy my son's well-being to get it. The thought struck my chest like a knife as I watched Ethan's life unravel after the wedding. My legal fortress remained secure for the moment, but my son was being worn down day by day. Chloe had achieved her first objective by marrying into this family. The extravagant wedding had been nothing more than a grand performance, draining every dollar Ethan had spent a lifetime saving, all so she could fill her social media accounts with glamorous photographs. My frustration grew with every passing week. Ethan had once been a young man overflowing with energy, carrying the same passion for music that his mother had cherished. Now, he looked like a wandering ghost. My son was working 60 hours a week at a technology company, just to keep up with the endless expenses Chloe created. She pressured him to buy a new apartment in the expensive West Loop district or move into my house where she could maintain greater control over him. Ethan was exhausted, yet he continued to smile, desperately trying to preserve the illusion of a happy marriage. I still remember one afternoon when he came to visit me alone. He collapsed onto the sofa. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. His hands trembled from lack of sleep. I could see the widening cracks spreading through his spirit. While Ethan worked himself to exhaustion, Chloe spent her days feeding an extravagant lifestyle online. Luxury vacations, designer handbags, endless purchases charged to Ethan's credit cards. She treated my son like an inexhaustible printing press for money. I tried to warn him, again and again. I told him that any relationship built on unequal responsibility and financial imbalance would eventually collapse from within. But love had made him deaf. He always found excuses for her. He insisted Chloe was still young. He said she needed time to adjust to married life. His tolerance only fueled the greed of the parasite attached to him, and Chloe never seemed satisfied. She always wanted more. My patience finally reached its limit when I uncovered another secret. Chloe had been quietly pressuring Ethan to sign for a new mortgage loan using the house Eleanor and I treasured most as collateral. She claimed she needed capital for her consulting business, a perfect plan to hollow out the foundation of my family's wealth. Watching my son being drained of his strength, I knew I could no longer remain a distant observer. I could not allow the entire structure to collapse. It was time to act. Carefully. Precisely. Without mercy. I picked up the phone and called an old friend who operated one of the city's most respected private investigation firms. 2 days later, the first report landed in my hands, and what it revealed about my seemingly sweet and devoted daughter-in-law was far worse than anything I had imagined. The documents did not expose simple greed. They exposed a hidden life, and the moment I read the first page, I understood that Chloe had never intended to become part of this family at all. She had entered it with a plan that had begun long before she ever met my son. The investigator's report sat neatly on my desk. Every page stripped away another layer of Chloe's carefully crafted mask. The daughter-in-law who constantly bragged about her successful media consulting business had built her reputation on a lie. The company did not legally exist. There were no registrations, no legitimate business records, no clients, no employees. It was a ghost company she had invented to justify a life of idleness and dependence. I turned to the surveillance photographs attached to the report. While Ethan worked himself into exhaustion at the office, often staying past midnight to finish demanding projects, Chloe followed a very different schedule. Her days were spent in some of the most expensive cafes in the city. She wore designer clothing. She staged glamorous photographs for social media. She laughed with friends and posed beside luxury purchases she had never earned. Every extravagant bill led back to Ethan's accounts. Every swipe of a credit card came from my son's labor. She was living like royalty on his sacrifice. A true economic parasite. Anger tightened in my throat. The entire structure now stood exposed before me. This was not merely selfishness. It was the blueprint of a marriage scam. She had used beauty and carefully rehearsed affection to trap a decent man. She had transformed Ethan's love into an endless banquet for her greed. Not once did the report reveal genuine concern for the husband supporting her lifestyle. Everything revolved around what she could take, nothing around what she could give. Her selfishness had reached astonishing levels. If you were in my position, watching a stranger quietly measure the value of everything you had built, what would you do? Would you confront them immediately, or would you prepare for war in silence? Leave comment number 2 if you would fight, quietly. Leave comment number 3 if you are still undecided. I chose to fight quietly. An architect never tears down a rotten support column before erecting the scaffolding needed to hold the structure together. I did not call Ethan to criticize him. I did not rush to confront Chloe. One final piece was still missing. I needed proof that she had deliberately targeted the steel box in my office. Fortunately, the miniature camera I had hidden on the bookshelf had captured every second of her break-in the previous night. Now everything was complete. The foundation of Chloe's deception had been fully exposed. It was time to step out of the shadows. I gathered the documents, photographs, and memory card containing the footage into a leather envelope. Then I drove straight to the apartment they rented in West Loop. I knew a storm was coming. What I did not anticipate was that Chloe had already prepared her first strike. The photographs she had secretly taken from my office had given her enough confidence to launch a reckless scheme of her own. The moment I stepped through the apartment door, I knew something was wrong. Ethan was standing in the living room. His face was pale, his eyes were filled with confusion and disappointment, and Chloe was crying. Not quietly, not naturally. She was performing. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clung to my son's arm. The instant she saw me, she pointed a trembling finger in my direction. Then she delivered the accusation she had clearly rehearsed long before I arrived. Dad has been spying on us. The room fell silent. My grip tightened around the leather envelope. Because in that moment I realized something dangerous. Chloe was no longer trying to steal the family's money. She was trying to destroy the trust between a father and his son. And that was a mistake she would soon regret more than anything she had done before. The door to the West Loop apartment had barely opened when the scent of Chloe's expensive perfume hit me. The tension inside the living room was immediate. Ethan sat on the sofa with his head lowered, his fingers tightly intertwined in front of him. He looked exhausted, defeated. The moment Chloe saw me step inside, she showed no fear whatsoever. Instead, she sprang to her feet. In her hand were printed copies of the documents she had photographed inside my office. She had decided to strike first. Without hesitation, Chloe launched into the role of the victim. She turned toward Ethan with tears already forming in her eyes. Then she pointed at me. Her voice trembled with manufactured outrage. She accused me of being a tyrant, a controlling father, a selfish old man obsessed with manipulating his son's life. She waved the papers in front of Ethan and claimed I had secretly created trusts and legal barriers specifically to exclude her from the family. She insisted I had never respected her, never accepted her, never treated her as one of us. Every sentence was carefully crafted to transform me into a villain in my son's eyes. The shamelessness of it made my blood boil. But I remained perfectly still, my back straight, my expression calm, like a load-bearing column designed to withstand an earthquake. I watched as she demanded rights to property she had never helped build. She insisted Ethan force me to transfer part of the ownership of the house Eleanor and I had cherished for decades. She called it her legal entitlement, her reward for supposedly sacrificing so much for this family. The louder she shouted, the more clearly her greed revealed itself. Every word stripped away another layer of the mask she had worn for years. Across the room, Ethan finally looked up. His eyes were filled with exhaustion and confusion. My son was trapped between the father who had raised him and the woman he still believed he loved. He thought this was merely a legal misunderstanding, nothing more. Seeing his hesitation, Chloe became even bolder. She declared that if I refused to transfer ownership of the house or surrender control of part of the estate, she would file for divorce. Then she threatened lawsuits, defamation claims, public accusations. She believed the photographs she had stolen gave her leverage. She believed she held the winning hand. I looked directly into her eyes and said nothing. The silence changed everything. Her voice weakened. The shouting slowed, then stopped completely. For the first time that evening, uncertainty appeared on her face. The room fell into a chilling silence. Slowly, I placed the leather envelope onto the glass coffee table. My gaze never left hers. Then I smiled. A cold, deliberate smile, because it was finally time for Chloe to see the true structure of the trap she had stepped into. I unfastened the envelope. Inside were several documents. I removed the first one, a legal filing bearing the official seal of one of the state's most respected law offices. Without a word, I slid it across the table toward her. Chloe snatched it up immediately. Her confidence lasted less than 3 seconds. I watched her eyes move across the first page, then reach the figure printed in bold type. The color drained from her face. Her mouth fell slightly open. The arrogance vanished. The anger vanished. Even the tears vanished. All that remained was pure terror, because the number she was staring at was not the value of the estate she hoped to claim. It was the amount she had unknowingly made herself liable for under the fraud and unlawful access provisions triggered by the documents she had stolen. And for the first time since entering my family, Chloe realized she had made a catastrophic miscalculation. The photographs she thought were her greatest weapon had just become the strongest evidence against her. The moment I spoke the number $2.5 million, the real monster inside Chloe finally revealed itself. The luxurious living room suddenly felt as suffocating as a tomb. I pointed to the legal document resting on the table. That figure represented the true value of the trust Eleanor had established for Ethan, a fortune large enough to provide comfort, security, and prosperity for the rest of his life. Chloe's eyes widened instantly. A raw hunger flashed across her face. She stared at the number the way a starving person might stare at a banquet. For a brief moment, pure greed overwhelmed every attempt at self-control. But the smile forming on her lips never had a chance to bloom. I turned the page. Everything changed. The next document was the prenuptial agreement, the legal fortress I had spent years designing. I looked directly at Chloe as the color slowly drained from her face. Then I began explaining the provisions one by one, every asset, every account, every dollar held within the trust. All of it belonged solely to Ethan. The trust was protected under strict legal safeguards. It remained completely separate from the marriage, and in the event of divorce, none of it could become marital property. Not a dollar. Not a single cent. Chloe lunged forward and grabbed the documents. She flipped through the pages frantically. Her hands shook so violently that the edges of the paper began to tear. The transformation was horrifying to watch. The helpless victim she had pretended to be vanished completely. In its place stood someone consumed by panic, consumed by greed, consumed by the realization that everything she believed she was entitled to was slipping away. Then understanding struck her. The steel box she had broken into the night before had been bait. The photographs she had stolen were worthless. Every clause she thought she had uncovered required my written authorization before it could ever take effect. Her prized weapon had become useless. The shock quickly turned into rage. Chloe threw the documents onto the floor. The sound echoed through the apartment. Then she began screaming. Not arguing. Not defending herself. Screaming. Like an animal cornered with nowhere left to run. She turned toward Ethan and demanded his support. She begged, then threatened, then pleaded again. But Ethan remained seated. Silent. Motionless. Watching. For the first time since their wedding, my son looked at his wife as though she were a stranger, because for the first time he was seeing the truth. Not a loving partner. Not a devoted wife. Not a victim. Just a woman obsessed with a number. $2.5 million. I rose from my chair and straightened my jacket. An architect knows when a structure can no longer be saved. Ethan's marriage had collapsed the moment the foundation of deception beneath it was exposed. I looked at Chloe one final time. She stood there trembling with fury, breathing heavily, her carefully crafted world falling apart around her. Before leaving, I spoke a single sentence. I told her she should prepare herself for what would happen within the next 48 hours. Then I walked out, leaving behind a battlefield of shattered illusions. I knew Ethan needed time. Time to think. Time to grieve. Time to make the final decision for himself. But I also knew something else. The deadliest blow against Chloe had not yet been delivered. It was not hidden within the trust. It was not buried in legal documents. It was not contained in any financial record. The true weapon had been waiting quietly for 15 years, locked away among Eleanor's most treasured possessions, a priceless gift she had entrusted to me before her death. And once Chloe discovered what Eleanor had left behind, she would realize that losing the money was the least of her problems. One day after the explosion at the West Loop apartment, Ethan drove to my house on his own. My son looked as though he had just survived a serious illness. He said nothing. He simply walked into the old family living room and sat down in silence. I could see it in his eyes. His heart was breaking apart. The truth about Chloe had been far more brutal than someone as loving and trusting as Ethan could have imagined. I did not lecture him. I did not tell him that I had been right. Instead, I walked to a glass cabinet and removed a small oak box covered with years of dust. Then I placed it on the table in front of him. Inside was a single letter. The paper had yellowed with age. These were the final words Eleanor had written before she closed her eyes forever 15 years earlier. Somehow, she had seen it coming. She had understood the strength and weakness that existed within our son. I told Ethan to open it. As he unfolded the pages, his mother's voice seemed to return through every elegant line of handwriting. The letter contained advice about choosing a life partner, about recognizing genuine love in a world filled with hidden motives, about protecting one's heart without losing one's kindness. Then Ethan reached a particular sentence, and he broke down. Tears streamed down his face as he read the words again. Watch how people behave when they believe there is nothing left to gain from you. The sentence cut through the darkness in his mind like a beam of light. It perfectly described what had happened the night before. The moment Chloe realized she could never touch a single dollar from the trust, her mask had shattered. She had become vicious, cruel, vindictive. She had insulted Ethan, threatened him, promised to ruin his life. Her love had existed only as long as the money remained accessible. Have you ever met someone who saw a vault instead of your kindness? As I watched my son cry, I knew something important was happening. The cleansing had begun. These were not tears of longing for Chloe. They were tears of regret. Regret for allowing a stranger's greed to trample the values his mother and I had spent a lifetime teaching him. Regret for ignoring the warning signs. Regret for mistaking manipulation for love. Most importantly, Ethan finally understood something he had resisted for years. The fortress I built had never been intended to imprison him. It had been built to protect him from predators, protect him from exploitation, protect him from exactly the kind of person Chloe had proven herself to be. Slowly, Ethan wiped his eyes. Then he looked up. For the first time in a very long while, I saw certainty in his expression. The cracks in his spirit had begun to mend. His mother's words had reached places my warnings never could. The naive young man, blinded by devotion, was gone. In his place sat a man who finally understood the value of boundaries. A man carrying both his mother's wisdom and his father's resolve. He rose from the sofa and folded Eleanor's letter carefully. Then he slipped it into his jacket pocket. "I know what I have to do," he said quietly. That was all. No anger, no shouting, no hesitation, just certainty. A few minutes later, he climbed back into his car and drove toward West Loop. He intended to end the marriage. At least that was what I thought. What I did not know was that Ethan had spent the entire night preparing something of his own. Something neither Chloe nor I had anticipated. He was not returning with only divorce papers. He was carrying a weapon far more devastating than any legal document. Over the years, Chloe had built her entire identity on social media. The glamorous lifestyle, the luxury photographs, the carefully edited image of success. Everything was a performance, and Ethan possessed evidence capable of exposing every lie behind that performance. The fake consulting business, the hidden debts, the purchases made with his money, the messages she never expected anyone else to see. By the time Chloe realized what he had brought with him, it would already be too late. Because for the first time since their wedding, Ethan was no longer fighting to save the marriage. He was fighting to reclaim his life. And that made him far more dangerous than Chloe had ever imagined. Ethan walked into the West Loop apartment like a master builder arriving to demolish a structure that had long been condemned. Chloe was sitting on the sofa, surrounded by half-packed suitcases and scattered designer clothes. She assumed Ethan had returned to apologize, to beg, to continue serving as the personal bank account she had relied upon for years. A smug smile spread across her face. The contempt in her eyes was impossible to miss, but that smile vanished the instant Ethan tossed a stack of divorce papers and an eviction notice onto the coffee table in front of her. The atmosphere inside the apartment changed immediately. Everything intensified. This was not the same man who had left my house the day before. The heartbroken husband was gone. In his place stood someone who had finally opened his eyes. Ethan's voice rang through the room with a firmness Chloe had never heard before. He began laying out the financial reality of their marriage. One document after another. One fact after another. One lie after another. He produced detailed bank statements, records stretching back over 2 years. The numbers told a devastating story. During their entire marriage, Chloe had contributed only $900 to their shared expenses. And even that amount had not come from her own earnings. It was a reimbursement generated from charges she had secretly placed on Ethan's accounts. She had not invested a single dollar into their future. Not one. She had only taken, spent, consumed, lived comfortably on someone else's labor. The color drained from Chloe's face. She jumped to her feet and attempted to interrupt, attempted to explain, attempted to manipulate. But Ethan never gave her the opportunity. Every sentence he spoke cut through another layer of deception. Then he revealed the next piece. The fake consulting business. The company that existed only on social media and in Chloe's imagination. No legitimate operations. No real clients. No genuine income. Only appearances. Then came the footage. The hidden camera recording from my office. The video showing Chloe secretly entering the room and searching through private family documents. For the first time, genuine fear appeared in her eyes. But Ethan was not finished. His final move was the one she never anticipated. He had already shared the evidence with the individuals and companies that had helped sustain her carefully crafted online image. The sponsors, the collaborators, the business contacts, the people who believed they were associating with a successful professional. Now they were seeing the truth. The collapse was immediate and brutal. Her phone began vibrating non-stop, notification after notification. Contract cancellations, partnership terminations, requests for explanations, public distancing statements. The carefully manufactured image she had spent years building crumbled within hours. The glamorous influencer vanished. The luxury lifestyle vanished. The admiration vanished. All that remained was panic. Pure panic. For the first time, Chloe understood what it felt like to lose everything at once. The tears came, but nobody believed them anymore. Nobody rushed to comfort her. Nobody came to her rescue. The performance was over, and the audience had left. Under the supervision of building security, Chloe packed the remainder of her belongings and left the apartment. The humiliation was complete. She rolled her suitcase toward the elevator without once looking back at Ethan, without saying goodbye, without offering an apology. The apartment felt strangely empty afterward, yet somehow lighter, cleaner, like a dangerous crack had finally been removed from the foundation. I was waiting in the lobby when Ethan emerged from the building. The moment I saw the expression on his face, I knew something had changed. For the first time in years, he looked free. Not happy, not yet, but free. Free from manipulation, free from guilt, free from the weight he had been carrying for far too long. As we walked toward the parking garage together, I glanced at him and saw something that made me think of Eleanor. Strength. Quiet strength. The kind that survives storms. The kind that learns from pain instead of surrendering to it. Our family had endured the worst of the tempest and remained standing. The structure had held, but the story did not end there. 2 years after that painful reckoning, something remarkable entered Ethan's life. Someone unexpected. Someone who would prove that Eleanor's wisdom had been right all along. Because sometimes a foundation must be cleared of every rotten beam before something truly beautiful can be built upon it. 2 years passed quickly after the financial storm named Chloe. The old house Eleanor and I had built was once again filled with light, warmth, and laughter. On the living room sofa, Ethan sat playing his guitar. Beside him was Lily, a young woman whose smile seemed to brighten every corner of the room. Unlike Chloe, Lily never looked at the expensive crown molding on the ceiling to estimate its value. Instead, she spent her time studying the old family photographs displayed throughout the house. She often asked about Eleanor, not out of curiosity about inheritance, not out of calculation, but out of genuine respect. She wanted to know about Eleanor's love of music, her kindness, her dreams, the stories behind the photographs. I stood quietly in the kitchen doorway and watched them together. For the first time in many years, I felt complete peace. An architect understands that once a rotten structure has been removed, space becomes available for something stronger to be built in its place. Lily was that new foundation. The missing piece our family never knew it was waiting for. She loved Ethan for who he was. Not for the $2.5 million in the trust. Not for the house. Not for the future inheritance. Simply for the man himself. And that made all the difference. As I look back on everything that happened, there is one lesson I want to leave with you. Throughout life, you will encounter people who see kindness as an opportunity rather than a virtue. They wear polished smiles. They say all the right words. But beneath the surface lies an endless hunger for what belongs to someone else. The hardest truth I learned is this: good people cannot always be protected by goodness alone. Sometimes kindness needs boundaries. Sometimes compassion needs strength. Sometimes love needs rules. Build those boundaries before you need them. Protect the people you care about. Protect your family. Protect your future. Because kindness without strength often becomes an invitation to exploitation. In the end, our story reached a deeply satisfying conclusion. Justice prevailed. Truth survived. And the values Eleanor spent her life defending remained intact. Thank you for spending this time with Dad's Real Life Revenge. Remember this: as you move through your own journey, storms will come. People will disappoint you. Foundations will be tested. But if your principles are strong enough, your life can withstand even the fiercest winds. And sometimes after the storm has passed, the view becomes more beautiful than you ever imagined. That night, the rain poured relentlessly. A runaway container truck barreled straight through the US 41 intersection. The sound of metal tearing through the night echoed everywhere. Tires screamed across the soaking wet pavement. And then came an impact powerful enough to crush everything. In the instant, my SUV rolled over the world, completely collapsed. Blood. Darkness. Absolute silence. My brain felt like a system that had suddenly lost power. My body was motionless. But one thing was still functioning: awareness. I wasn't dead. I was simply trapped inside my own body. I could still hear everything. I could still feel every breath. And there, on the boundary between life and death, I witnessed a horrifying truth. The machines said I was unconscious. My family said they wished I would never wake up. Both were wrong, and that mistake cost them everything. Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. Grab a drink, some snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose not to. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one. My name is Matt Harris. I'm a logistics coordinator. For the past 30 years, my job has been managing risks and handling incidents along transportation routes. I control every variable. I calculate every second of delay. But I forgot one fundamental rule of this industry. The worst accidents always happen on the roads you know best. Yet that very disaster helped me realize that the family system I had devoted my life to building, protecting, and operating had actually been rotten for a long time. The people I loved most were standing around my hospital bed. They weren't looking at me with concern. They were looking at me like defective cargo that needed to be cleared out to free up space. They didn't know I could hear them. They thought I was nothing more than an empty shell. They started discussing how to divide my assets while I was still barely hanging on. It was ridiculous. After a lifetime of managing global supply chains, I had allowed a pack of vultures to manipulate things right inside my own home. But they overestimated their plan and overlooked one crucial detail. The pungent smell of antiseptic flooded my senses. The steady beeping of the heart monitor echoed beside my ear. I was lying in the intensive care unit of the central hospital. Locked-in syndrome was a disgusting experience. My eyes could not open. My fingers could not move. I was like a prisoner trapped inside my own flesh. Yet my hearing had become cruelly sharp. The hospital room door was slightly ajar. I heard footsteps entering. The familiar click of high heels belonged to Sandra, my wife. Accompanying her was the head physician. I could feel her warmth as she stood beside my bed. But the words that came from her lips were as cold as ice. She asked the doctor about my condition. Her voice did not tremble. Not a single tear fell. She only wanted to know when it would all be over. The doctor explained the extent of the brain damage. He said I had a chance of waking up, but it would require time and enormous expenses to keep me alive. At that moment, I heard my wife sigh. It was a sigh filled with calculation, not despair. She lowered her voice. She told the doctor that 58 years was already a complete life. She did not want to see her husband suffer in a hospital bed. The words sounded compassionate, but in reality they were a death sentence. She was deliberately steering the doctor toward an extreme decision. Only 3 days had passed since the horrific accident at the US 41 intersection. 3 short days. That was the full extent of the patience my wife of 30 years was willing to give me. She was not waiting for a miracle. She was rushing to shut the door on my survival. The rustling of paper filled the room. Sandra pulled a document from her handbag. It was a DNR order, a do not resuscitate directive. If my heart stopped beating, the doctors would not intervene. They would allow me to die naturally. It was a death warrant disguised as loving concern. I lay there, my chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the ventilator. I wanted to scream. I wanted to strangle the wretched woman standing in front of me. But my body had completely betrayed me. Helplessly, I listened to the click of a plastic pen cap. The faint scratch of a pen across paper followed. Sandra had signed it. She signed it in blue ink, the color of hope, yet she was using it to end my life. As she signed, she whispered that this was the best thing for all of us. My entire command system was clogged with rage. The woman I had devoted myself to, the woman who had spent the money I earned through sweat and sacrifice, had decided to pull the plug on me after only 72 hours. But this cruelty was merely the opening act of a much larger play. Her scheme did not involve only herself. The hospital room door opened once again. This time, the footsteps belonged to people I knew better than anyone. The real vultures had smelled the decay and were beginning to gather for their share of the spoils. The hospital room door shut firmly. Heavy footsteps entered. It was Carl, my 28-year-old son. Right behind him was Eva, my youngest daughter. They did not rush to my bedside. They did not take hold of their father's cold hand. The first thing they did was pull up chairs around the coffee table. The aroma of expensive coffee filled the room. Carl began flipping through stacks of documents. He did not ask his mother how much hope I had left. The first thing out of his mouth was a question about my bank accounts. He was reviewing my financial records. He used economic terminology to analyze his father's death. He talked about the liquidity of the inheritance assets. He calculated how long it would take to convert the house, the parcels of land, and the company shares into cash. His mind worked like a soulless computer. He wanted everything liquidated the moment I drew my final breath. Eva sat scrolling through her phone. She complained in an irritated tone. She said having to drive 20 miles to visit her father was extremely inconvenient. She was worried that this schedule would interfere with her vacation plans for next week. The daughter I had once spoiled like a princess, the one who never hesitated to demand expensive designer handbags, now viewed her father's survival as nothing more than a transportation burden. I lay there. Every word they spoke pierced my ears like sharpened knives. My chest tightened. A wave of disgust rose and lodged in my throat. My 21-year-old son had already scheduled my death into his financial plans. They viewed my life as inventory that needed to be liquidated for capital. Sandra made no attempt to stop them. In fact, she nodded in agreement with the figures Carl presented. The three people I had once called family sat together, calculating the day I would die so they could divide the spoils. They methodically and coldly assigned ownership of every car and every joint account. But this cruel family meeting was not finished yet. Carl suddenly lowered his voice. He mentioned a name that instantly froze the atmosphere in the room. Adrian. My stepson, the one I had spent my youth raising and eventually entrusted with the position of vice president of the company. Carl said Adrian had been making some highly suspicious moves at the office. At that very moment, while I was not even dead yet, the child I had trusted most was allegedly preparing to strike a fatal blow from behind my back and seize the work of my entire lifetime. The hospital room became terrifyingly quiet the moment Adrian's name was mentioned with suspicion. Adrian was Sandra's son from her previous marriage. I met him when he was a timid 5-year-old boy. I raised him as if he were my own flesh and blood. I paid every dollar of his college tuition. I bought him his first house when he got married. When he wanted to study business, I brought him into my logistics company and steadily helped him climb the ladder until he became executive vice president. I had given him every privilege a father could possibly give a son. But my kindness had only fattened a greedy wolf. Carl opened another file on his computer. He began reading reports from the corporate office aloud. Adrian had not visited the hospital a single time since the accident. Instead, he had been busy doing something else. He was pushing for an emergency board meeting. His goal was to rapidly liquidate the company's fixed assets. He wanted to sell off the core trucking fleet and consolidate ultimate control in his own hands. His justification was that the company needed immediate restructuring because its leader had been incapacitated. Sandra showed no surprise at Carl's information. In fact, she completely supported Adrian's plan. She said Adrian was doing the right thing. The company needed to remain in the hands of family before creditors started tearing it apart. Family. According to her definition of that word, my name was nowhere on the list. Adrian's coldness, after everything I had done for him, struck my pride like a lethal blow. He had forgotten every loan I had guaranteed on his behalf. He had forgotten that the vice president's chair he occupied had been placed there by my own hands. He was prepared to erase me while I was still fighting for breath in a hospital bed so he could sit in the chairman's seat. The betrayal exceeded the limits of what any human being could endure. I could feel my blood boiling. The rage I had suppressed for so long transformed into a dark source of energy. My body began showing small reactions. My heart rate suddenly accelerated on the monitor. The rapid beeping filled the room. Sandra glanced at the screen, but she assumed it was nothing more than an ordinary physical spasm. She had no idea that my mind had fully activated survival mode. They believed they controlled the entire game. They believed the signed DNR order would remove the final obstacle from their path. But they were wrong. My internal system audit was complete. I knew every face, every scheme, every parasite feeding on my life, and fate had granted me a second chance to turn the tables. Then at last a miracle happened. One that completely shattered every part of their plan. On the 7th day after the accident, I opened my eyes. The white light of the hospital room stung my vision. But what truly made me sick were the faces surrounding my bed. Sandra, Carl, Eva, and Adrian. They were all there. The moment the doctors announced signs of my recovery, they rushed in immediately. I saw the shock flash across Sandra's face. The mask of fabricated joy was hastily put back on. She threw her arms around me and burst into dramatic tears. She said, "Thank God for giving me a second chance at life." Carl and Eva stood beside her, eagerly joining in, claiming they had been so worried they could barely eat or sleep. Adrian stepped forward, gripped my hand firmly, and assured me that the company was stable and that everyone had simply been waiting for me to wake up and lead again. A flawless performance. If I had not heard everything they had said over the previous 7 days, I might have been moved to tears. But I was a logistics coordinator. I understood how to observe and analyze behavior. Their urgency was a symptom of panic. The DNR order no longer mattered. Their plan to divide my estate had been stopped at the gate. They were afraid I would discover the truth. So I decided to give them exactly what they wanted. I relaxed my facial muscles. I stared at them with dull, vacant eyes. When Sandra asked whether I recognized her, I took several long seconds before slowly nodding. I spoke in a weak, fragmented voice. I pretended to be mildly confused from the effects of the accident. I asked simple, foolish questions about the date and my work. I wanted them to believe my brain had been damaged. I wanted them to think that the sharp, intelligent Matt Harris they once knew was gone, replaced by a confused 58-year-old man who would be easy to manipulate. As they watched my sluggish behavior, I noticed a subtle sense of relief in all 4 of them. They exchanged glances. Small knowing smiles began to appear. They believed they could continue their scheme under the guise of caring for a confused father. They believed they had already won. But they had no idea that my mask was the most dangerous thing in the room. This fake confusion was my passport to quietly investigate the rotten system I had built around myself. I needed evidence. I needed precise numbers to execute a complete lockdown. And the moment I was discharged and returned home, I secretly established an underground network of audits and investigations. What I discovered afterward was even more horrifying than the conversations I had overheard in that hospital room. I returned home with a cane and a sluggish gait. My family believed they were caring for a confused invalid. They freely plotted and schemed right in front of me. What they did not know was that behind the half-closed door of my study, I had already launched a large-scale investigation. I did not act alone. As a logistics professional, I understood how to leverage specialized resources for maximum effectiveness. I secretly contacted Ray, my longtime attorney, and Frank, a seasoned private investigator. We communicated through a disposable phone that I kept hidden inside a concealed safe. Their mission was simple: trace every financial transaction and every suspicious action taken by my family members during the time I had been hospitalized. Numbers do not lie. Just 3 days later, Frank sent me an encrypted file. I opened it at midnight while the entire house slept. Financial reports from the company appeared on my computer screen. My heart tightened as I reviewed the flow of funds. Adrian, the stepson I had supported with unwavering loyalty, had begun draining the company months earlier. He had created a shell company called Cooper Logistics LLC. Through that company, Adrian arranged fraudulent service contracts and inflated the cost of incoming supplies. The total amount he had embezzled reached $500,000. He had taken advantage of my hospitalization to legitimize the paperwork behind those transactions. He had even signed my name on company disbursement authorizations. His greed had left a massive financial hole in the operating system I had spent my entire life building. The betrayal of the son I had raised sent a chill through my body. But that was not the worst thing Frank uncovered. As he traced personal accounts and travel records connected to the other family members, he discovered another disgusting truth. A dark secret directly involving Sandra and the savings I had accumulated over a lifetime. The next file from Detective Frank contained a series of high-resolution photographs. Sandra appeared on my computer screen. She was not out shopping as she had claimed. She was standing in front of a luxury penthouse downtown with a younger man. His name was Scott Wheeler, her personal fitness trainer. They had been together for 14 months. While I spent my nights managing shipments and solving crises, my wife had been spending my money on her younger lover. But the deepest wound was not the betrayal itself. To a logistics professional, this was a deliberate and systematic budget leak. Sandra had used our joint accounts to purchase a luxury sports car for him. She had paid for their extravagant vacations. Even worse, Frank uncovered evidence that Sandra had forged my signature. While I lay unconscious after the accident, she had fabricated documents granting herself full power of attorney. She was quietly transferring ownership of our home into the names of herself and her lover. This woman did not merely want me dead. She wanted to strip away every dollar and every brick I had spent 30 years building with my own sweat and sacrifice. She intended to turn me into a homeless man while I was still lying in a hospital bed. I sat alone in the darkness, my fists clenched so tightly that my fingernails dug into my palms. The initial pain had disappeared. All that remained was a deadly calm. I analyzed the affair the same way I would investigate a major inventory loss in a warehouse. Sandra and her lover were toxic links in the chain. They believed they had concealed their tracks perfectly. They believed I was a confused old man who no longer had the ability to defend himself. If you've made it this far, then perhaps this story has been interesting. Please do us a quick favor, like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you've watched this far, and tell me how you think the story will end to see whether your prediction is correct. Many people watch without doing so, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. Every piece of evidence was now safely in my possession. From Adrian's embezzlement scheme to Sandra's affair, everything had been carefully traced, documented, and stored. The vultures believed their feast was approaching. What they did not know was that I had already prepared a very special delivery. A logistics operation of revenge had been set in motion. The truth was about to be revealed during the most important family event of all, a celebration they would never forget for the rest of their lives. I'm not a vindictive man. I'm a logistics professional. I like things to be clean, orderly, and efficient. When a supply chain breaks down, you don't sit around crying about it. You identify the faulty link and isolate it. My family had become a system rotten from the inside out. It was time for me to execute the most efficient liquidation process possible. I began preparing for the final delivery while maintaining the appearance of a confused old father. Every day I sat in the living room with a vacant stare. I allowed Sandra to spoon-feed me soup. I let Carl and Adrian openly discuss selling the trucking fleet right in front of me. But when night fell, Attorney Ray and I quietly carried out a series of legal and highly confidential asset transfers. The first target was the joint account Sandra and I shared. I silently withdrew $800,000. It was the most liquid portion of the cash reserve, the very money she intended to use to support her lover, Scott Wheeler. I transferred every dollar into an offshore trust that could not easily be traced or recovered. Sandra never noticed. She was far too confident in my supposed confusion. In fact, she did not even bother checking the account balances. Next came the new will. I signed documents revoking every previous inheritance arrangement. In the new will notarized by Ray, I completely rewrote the distribution percentages. Sandra, Carl, Ava, and Adrian would each receive exactly $1,000. The figure carried a deeply ironic message. It was enough to prevent challenges based on minimum inheritance claims, and it was enough to mock the greed that had consumed them. As for Adrian and Cooper Logistics, I forwarded the complete evidence package regarding the $500,000 in embezzled funds to the Financial Crimes Division. I requested only one thing: keep everything confidential until the exact date I specified. I wanted the strike to land when they were least prepared. I had not forgotten Carl and Eva either. I withdrew my financial guarantee on Eva's mortgage loan. I issued notice terminating Carl's employment with the parent company for ethical violations. Every step was scheduled with minute-by-minute precision, just like a delivery route that allowed no margin for error. The celebration of Sandra's and my 30th wedding anniversary was approaching. Sandra had planned the event long ago as a public display of happiness for neighbors and business associates. She had even ordered an elegant blue gown so she could shine throughout the evening. I agreed to fund every expense of that lavish celebration. I wanted every witness to their betrayal present. The stage had been built. The special envelopes had been sealed. The audience would soon fill every seat. But the most terrifying part of this reversal was not hidden inside those envelopes. It was hidden inside a surprise gift. A gift so devastating that even Sandra could never have imagined it waiting for her when she stepped onto that stage. The chandeliers in the five-star hotel ballroom shone brilliantly overhead. The clinking of crystal glasses echoed through the room. More than 100 guests, business partners, and neighbors alike mingled and laughed. Sandra stood at the center of the stage. She looked stunning in an elegant blue silk gown, A glass of wine rested in one hand while the other supported me as I pretended to walk slowly with my cane. Everyone applauded a marriage that had supposedly endured for 30 years. They praised Sandra as the devoted wife who had helped her husband recover from the horrific accident at the US 41 intersection. Adrian stood nearby in a tailored suit, carrying himself with the confidence of a future chairman. Carl and Eva smiled brightly, already anticipating the inheritance announcement they believed Sandra had carefully arranged. Sandra stepped up to the microphone. In an emotional voice, she spoke about love, sacrifice, and how family was life's only true refuge. I stood below the stage and watched her performance. The deadly calm within me had reached its peak. The supply chain of revenge had arrived at its delivery point. I slowly stepped onto the stage and signaled the sound technician to cut Sandra's microphone. Then I announced that I had 4 special envelopes I wished to personally present to my beloved family members in honor of this important occasion. I called Carl up first. I handed him a white envelope. Eagerly, he opened it in front of the cameras. His smile froze instantly. Inside was not a property deed. It was his termination notice from the company, along with documentation revoking the luxury vehicle the company had provided him. Carl stared in disbelief, all color draining from his face. I turned to Eva and handed her the second envelope. It contained official paperwork from the bank, informing her that I had withdrawn my financial guarantee. Unless she paid her debt, her house would be foreclosed the following week. Eva let out a sharp cry and nearly collapsed. The crowd began whispering. Confusion spread throughout the ballroom. Sandra turned pale and attempted to seize the microphone, but I stopped her. Then I handed her the third envelope. Inside were divorce papers, accompanied by a complete set of high-resolution photographs documenting her relationship with her personal trainer, Scott Wheeler. The documents proving that she had forged my signature to transfer ownership of our home had been enlarged and printed as exhibits. They scattered across the stage floor for everyone to see. Sandra stood frozen in her blue gown as the crowd stared. The image she had spent years building was stripped away in a matter of seconds. Finally, I looked toward Adrian. I did not hand him an envelope. Instead, I turned toward the ballroom entrance. The large doors swung open. 4 investigators from the Financial Crimes Division entered. They walked directly to the stage and announced Adrian's arrest on charges related to the embezzlement of $500,000 and the falsification of corporate documents connected to Cooper Logistics, LLC. The metallic click of handcuffs locking around Adrian's wrists echoed through the microphone system. He screamed Sandra's name in desperation. The ballroom became a battlefield of humiliation. The same 4 people who had once gathered around my hospital bed were now trembling, crying, and trying to gather the shattered pieces of their deception. They stared at me with pure terror. They could not understand how a supposedly confused old man had orchestrated such a devastating reversal. But my game was not over yet. The final blow was not waiting inside that ballroom. It was waiting on their phones. And it would arrive the moment I walked out the door. Adrian's screams and Sandra's sobs gradually faded behind me. I slowly walked out of the ballroom of the 5-star hotel. I never looked back, not even once. My new SUV was already running at the entrance. I climbed inside and tossed the cane onto the passenger seat. My entire system was finally clean. I drove into the night, heading north. Rain began to fall again, just like it had on the night of the horrific accident at the US 41 intersection. But this time, my mind was completely free and at peace. The phone resting on my dashboard vibrated nonstop. Hundreds of calls and messages from Sandra, Carl, and Eva poured in. They begged. They explained. They pleaded for forgiveness. I pressed send on a single group message to all of them. I heard every single word. There is nothing left to say. Our 30-year relationship is over. I'm very glad you've stayed with this story until the end. Join our community by hitting the like and subscribe buttons to enjoy more real hard-hitting stories centered around family relationships. And as always, thank you for being part of this space. This journey taught me an expensive lesson about human nature. Never underestimate the silence of a man who has spent his entire life building something. When such a man becomes silent, it does not mean he is weak or accepting defeat. It means he is observing, analyzing, and preparing for the most decisive course of action. Trust is something that must be protected, but truth is the only thing that endures. Betrayal can disguise itself with sweet words, but financial records and real-world actions will always expose the truth. True happiness is not found in the amount of wealth you possess. It is found in the people who genuinely deserve to stand beside you when your life falls apart. I lost a counterfeit family, but I reclaimed my life and my freedom. I stood in front of the gleaming glass doors of the Chase Bank. In my hands was a worn blue folder with frayed corners. The cold morning wind slipped through my thin coat, but it was nothing compared to the coldness inside my heart. I looked at my reflection in the glass. A 68-year-old man with hands covered in calluses from working double shifts for 30 years. I sacrificed everything to raise my son. But what did I get in return? After my son got married, he started treating me like an old debt that needed to be thrown away. But today inside this bank, I was about to sign a surprise gift that would leave them with nothing. Welcome to the channel Dad's Real Life Revenge. I'm Arthur. Stay with me until the end of this story because you are going to be shocked. And do not forget to leave a comment with the name of the city you are watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Everything began 3 years ago when David brought Samantha home. Back then I smiled. I thought I was gaining a daughter. At first, Samantha was as sweet as honey. She praised my garden. She promised she would take good care of David. But right after the wedding, the mask began to crack. "Dad," Samantha said as she raised an eyebrow and looked around the living room. "This house feels so outdated. The smell of old wood makes me feel suffocated. I think we should sell it and buy a modern apartment downtown instead." I tightened my grip on the coffee cup in my hand. This was the house my late wife and I built together. Every brick carried our sweat and sacrifice. But Samantha did not care. Her eyes were not looking at me. They were fixed on the wall behind me where I kept the property documents. I saw a flash of ambition in those sharp eyes. I chose to stay silent because I loved my son. I did not know that silence would become the beginning of a cruel plan. Samantha's presence in the house was like icy water, seeping into every crack of my family. She started with little things. Moving my wife's flower vase. Replacing the cream-colored curtains with cold gray fabric. Then she began cutting the ties between David and me. Our joyful weekend dinners slowly disappeared. In their place came excuses about being busy, family outings I was never invited to. Samantha was incredibly skilled at isolating me. She created an atmosphere that made me feel like an unwanted stranger inside my own home. The breaking point came last Christmas. In 56 years, I had never spent Christmas alone. That morning I woke up early. I prepared pancake batter and warmed the maple syrup. I eagerly waited for Leo's laughter and David's familiar high five. But the house was frighteningly silent. I walked upstairs and found their room empty. A note was taped to the refrigerator. "Dad, we took Leo to Samantha's parents' house for Christmas. Samantha said you needed some quiet rest." David. I stood frozen in the empty kitchen. The sound of my fork touching the porcelain plate echoed harshly through the silence. For the first time in my life, the maple syrup on my pancakes tasted bitter with abandonment. I ate in the dark because I could not bear the emptiness of the room around me. Samantha had succeeded. She had turned me into a ghost inside my own home. I looked out the window and saw the neighbors' lights sparkling warmly. They were laughing together, and I was alone with fading memories. Every bite I swallowed felt like a stone pressing deeper into my chest. I wondered what David was thinking. Did he remember all the Christmases when I worked extra night shifts just to buy him the toys he dreamed of? Probably not. Samantha had brainwashed him too well. My patience had limits. I was willing to ignore everything until what happened at Leo's birthday party. That was the moment I realized this woman's cruelty had no bottom. Leo's 5th birthday party was a terrible day. I had spent an entire month working in the woodworking shop downstairs. I carefully carved each wheel by hand. I polished the body of the train with the finest natural oil I could find. It was a wooden oak train, and I had engraved Leo's name along the side with all the pride of a grandfather's heart. I wanted my grandson to have something truly meaningful, something powered not by batteries but by imagination. When I carried the gift into the room filled with shiny wrapped boxes, Samantha looked at it with obvious disgust. She did not even bother touching it. "Oh, look at that," she said mockingly. "An old dusty toy. Dad, you do realize Leo only plays with toys that meet international safety standards, right? That wood could have splinters. It could scratch his hands." I froze. David stood there, but he would not look me in the eyes. Instead, he bent down and adjusted an expensive remote-controlled airplane. Samantha picked up my wooden train using only the tips of her fingers, as if she were holding a bag of garbage. Then she tossed it into a cardboard box in the corner of the room. The box for things that were about to be donated or thrown away. "Just leave it there," Samantha said to David. "I don't want cheap junk taking up space in our son's room." My chest tightened with pain. That was not just a toy. It was my sweat, my effort, and my love carved into wood. And David stayed silent. He had completely chosen his wife's side. In that moment, I felt like a stranger interrupting the party of wealthy people who no longer needed me. Quietly, I walked away while they began cutting the birthday cake. No one noticed I was gone. I returned to my room and shut the door behind me. I sat there in darkness, feeling the collapse of the family I had spent my entire life building. Samantha did not just want my assets. She wanted to erase my existence. She wanted me to disappear just like that wooden train. The hurt inside me slowly transformed into a cold, burning hatred. I was no longer sad. I started watching. I started listening. And that was when I realized Samantha was hiding a secret far darker than her arrogance. 3 days after Leo's birthday party, my phone rang at 8 o'clock that evening. It was Samantha. Her voice over the phone sounded sweet, rustling like dry leaves underfoot. But I could feel the poison hidden beneath it. "Dad," she said softly, "David and I have been thinking a lot about your future. You've been forgetful lately. This house is far too big and dangerous for an elderly man living alone. We think it's time you had some professional financial planning." I tightened my grip on the receiver. The financial planning she talked about was really a death sentence for my freedom. She started mentioning a retirement home in the suburbs, a place she called paradise for seniors. But I knew it was nothing more than a glass cage where she could easily control everything I owned. The next morning, I quietly went to the Chase Bank. I did not tell David. I wanted to review my savings accounts myself. When I sat across from the financial advisor, she looked at me with sympathy in her eyes. "Mr. Arthur," she hesitated, "3 days ago, a woman claiming to be your daughter-in-law came here. She brought an unsigned power of attorney form and asked very detailed questions about your current balances." The blood in my veins turned cold. Samantha had already come here before me. She was not waiting for my permission. She was hunting down every dollar I had spent my life saving. She wanted to know how large the prey was before swallowing it whole. I walked out of the bank. The sunlight was bright and golden, but I felt freezing cold inside. Samantha was not just a gold digger. She was a ruthless predator. She was studying guardianship laws. She wanted to prove I was mentally unstable so she could strip away my right to control my own life. I sat down on a stone bench in the park across from the bank and watched people passing by. That was when I realized I could no longer remain a sheep waiting to be slaughtered. If Samantha wanted to play a financial game, I would show her who truly controlled the board. But first, I needed to know whether she was drowning in debt or planning something far darker. I pulled out my phone and called an old friend. "Miller, I need your help. I want you to investigate someone." The truth that was coming would hit harder than any of us expected. Detective Miller arranged to meet me at a small diner on a quiet street corner. He slid a brown folder across the table toward me. The worry in his eyes was impossible to hide. "Arthur," he said quietly, "your daughter-in-law is more than just greedy. She's standing at the edge of a cliff." I opened the file. Numbers began dancing before my eyes. Samantha owed $63,000 to a casino in Atlantic City. She had been using David's credit cards to stay afloat, but things had spiraled beyond control. The debt was growing every single day under vicious interest rates. That was why she was desperately trying to force me to sign over the house. She needed cash fast, before debt collectors came knocking at her door. But that was not even the worst part. Miller flipped to another page. This is her computer search history. Samantha had been carefully researching the symptoms of early-stage dementia. She had been looking into ways to fake medical reports and declare me mentally incompetent. If she succeeded in gaining guardianship, every asset I owned would fall under her control, and I would be locked away in some cheap nursing home for the rest of my life. Rage erupted inside me like a volcano. I had started wondering whether I truly was getting old. But now, I felt sharper than ever before. Samantha thought I was a weak old man, an easy target. She had no idea that before retirement I spent my entire life dealing with ruthless and manipulative people in business. I closed the folder slowly. "Thank you, Miller," I said. "Now I know exactly what I need to do. I would not just protect my assets. I would let Samantha dig her own grave with the endless greed consuming her soul." I returned home wearing a quiet smile. I began pretending to forget little things. I left my keys in the wrong places. I repeated the same questions again and again. And every time I acted confused, I saw Samantha's eyes light up with excitement. She believed her plan was working perfectly. What she did not know was that I was weaving a massive trap, and she was the prey. My revenge began with an unbelievable number. I needed bait large enough that she would never be able to resist it. The recording device I placed on the table was actually nothing more than a garage door remote. But the truth, Samantha confessed, would destroy this marriage forever. I began my performance on a Saturday afternoon, while everyone was gathered in the living room. I pretended to search through my coat pocket for an old document. Then I muttered loudly enough for Samantha to hear. "Oh, this memory of mine. I have no idea where I put those stock certificates. And the coastal property papers, too, not to mention the trust funds. Altogether, it's worth more than $4 million. I saw Samantha freeze instantly. The wine glass in her hand tilted so sharply it almost spilled. Her entire expression changed. The usual contempt vanished, replaced by wild hunger. I could actually see her pupils widen. Even the sunlight reflecting off the broken glass outside the porch was not as sharp as the greed awakening inside her. "What did you just say?" Samantha stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You have stocks and real estate worth $4 million. Why have we never heard about this before?" I pretended to look confused. I stared at her with dull, distracted eyes. "Didn't I mention it before? Maybe I forgot. Those investments go back to when I was still working in the city. I plan to leave everything to Leo when he grows up. But lately I haven't been feeling well. Maybe I should find someone trustworthy to manage it for me." Samantha took a deep breath. Then she sat beside me and grabbed my rough, calloused hand. Her fake kindness was so exaggerated it made me sick. "Dad, you can trust us," she said softly. "David is your son, and I'll take the best care of you. You don't need to worry about those numbers anymore." I looked straight into her eyes. I could see calculations moving faster than a computer behind them. She was already figuring out how much of the imaginary $4.4 million would erase her gambling debts, and how much would remain for designer handbags and luxury vacations. In reality, I only had $200,000 in savings. But that fake fortune was the perfect bait. That entire evening, Samantha treated me like royalty. She cooked all my favorite meals. She gently tucked a blanket over my shoulders. But later, standing in the darkness of the hallway, I saw her hurriedly whispering into her phone. She was preparing the final paperwork to seize a treasure that did not even exist. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. I had lifted her to the peak of hope, and now it was time to take her to visit the very place where she intended to throw me away. Samantha could not wait another second. Early Monday morning, she drove me around to visit several nursing homes she had already chosen for me. She called it a practical tour, to find the best retirement place for my future. I sat in the passenger seat pretending to doze off, but through half-closed eyes I watched every movement she made. Samantha drove with the confidence of someone who already believed she owned millions. She hummed softly to herself, as if the fortune was already sitting in her pocket. We stopped at a facility hidden deep beyond a thin forest. From the outside it looked elegant and expensive, but inside the place radiated a terrifying coldness. While a consultant guided us through the building, Samantha pulled aside the manager for a private conversation. I remained behind a thin wall and listened carefully. "If I sign full power of attorney," Samantha asked in a cold voice, "can you guarantee he won't be able to leave on his own? I want him under special supervision. He shouldn't have too much contact with the outside world. It could worsen his confusion." My chest tightened with rage. She did not just want my money. She wanted to erase my existence. She wanted to lock me inside a prison disguised as a nursing home, while she freely spent the money I had sacrificed my entire life to earn. I stepped back into view, wearing my best dazed expression. I nodded at everything she suggested. Samantha smiled with satisfaction. She believed I was completely under her control now. "All right, Dad," she said as we returned to the car. "This afternoon we'll go to the Chase Bank and sign the power of attorney documents. That way you won't have to worry about managing those $4 million anymore. I'll take care of everything for you. I stared out the car window. The passing trees looked like scenes from my life flashing by. I remembered my late wife. I remembered David as a little boy clinging to my leg. And now, I was heading toward the bank for the final step of my plan. When we walked into the Chase Bank lobby, Samantha straightened my collar like a loving daughter. She whispered sweet lies into my ear about a peaceful future. What she did not know was that Detective Miller was already waiting inside the office with evidence she could never deny. The office door slowly opened. The bright neon light spilled across Samantha's glowing face, shining with ambition and greed. This was the moment every mask would finally be torn away. We sat inside the VIP office of the bank. Samantha placed the power of attorney documents on the table, her hands trembling with excitement. She pushed the pen toward me. "Dad, you just need to sign right here," she whispered. "All your burdens will disappear." I picked up the pen, but I did not look at the papers. I looked directly into Samantha's eyes. The greed burning inside them was terrifyingly obvious. Then I slowly placed the pen back down. "I'm not signing," I said in the calmest and coldest voice I could manage. Samantha froze instantly. The smile on her face stiffened. "What do you mean?" she stammered. "Dad, you must be confused again. Let me help you." "No, Samantha, I'm not confused. And I'm not mentally unstable." I leaned closer. "I know about the $63,000 debt in Atlantic City. I know about the times you sneaked into my room searching for property documents. And I also know about your plan to lock me inside a nursing home so you could steal my assets." The color drained from Samantha's face before turning dark with panic. She tried to jump out of her chair, but at that exact moment the office door opened. Detective Miller walked in carrying a thick stack of evidence detailing her attempts to forge medical records, declaring me mentally incompetent. Samantha started breathing heavily. Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal searching for an escape. "You're insane," she screamed. "You can't do this to me. I'm your family, and what about the $4 million? Are you just going to let it rot?" I smiled bitterly. "That's the best part, Samantha." I paused. "The $4 million never existed. It was bait. I wanted to see how far you were willing to go for greed. I only have $200,000 in this account, and you will not receive a single cent. If you have been listening this far and want stories like this to keep coming, hitting the like button and subscribing truly helps. 97% of people never do, but that small act is what keeps this entire channel alive." Samantha completely collapsed into the leather chair. Her usual arrogance vanished. All that remained was a pathetic woman, finally facing the truth. But her nightmare was only beginning. Suddenly, she exploded in rage and revealed her true nature completely. "You manipulative old man," she hissed through clenched teeth. "You think you've won? I'll take Leo away. You'll never see your grandson again." Samantha shot to her feet. She swept the folder off the table, sending papers flying everywhere, her face twisted with fury. "You think you're so clever," she screamed at me. "I'll destroy your life. I'll take Leo and disappear from this state. You'll grow old and die alone without ever touching a single hair on that boy's head again." I remained seated. I looked at her with nothing but pity. Then the office door opened once more. This time it was not a bank employee. David walked in. His face looked pale and exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot with disappointment and pain. In his hand was a stack of divorce papers that had already been prepared. Samantha froze completely. Her lips trembled. "David," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" "I can explain." "There's no need," Samantha David replied in a hoarse voice. "I was in the next office listening through the internal speaker system. I found out about your gambling debts 3 days ago because of Dad. I didn't want to believe it. I kept hoping you would stop. But trying to throw my father into a nursing home just to steal his money is unforgivable." David placed the divorce papers on the bank table. Beside them, he set down a temporary restraining order issued by the court. "You're not taking Leo anywhere," David said firmly. "I've already arranged temporary custody proceedings. You should focus on dealing with your legal problems with the casino." Samantha collapsed onto the floor. She burst into desperate sobs and grabbed at the leg of David's pants, begging for forgiveness. But David stepped back. He looked at her like she was a stranger, a predator finally caught in the trap created by her own greed. I stood up and placed my hand on my son's shoulder. I could feel him trembling. The truth always hurts, But sometimes it is the only medicine strong enough to save what remains of a family. Samantha looked up at me with pure hatred burning in her eyes. In that moment, she realized she had lost everything. No money, no power, no family. David and I walked out of the bank together, leaving Samantha behind with her desperate screams echoing through the hallway. The afternoon sunlight stretched long across the sidewalk outside. I took a deep breath, but our story was not truly over yet. The stormy days finally faded into the past. Samantha was forced into gambling, rehabilitation, and faced investigations for financial fraud. My house no longer carried the coldness of manipulation and deceit. David moved back in with me so the two of us could raise little Leo together. We spent many afternoons side by side in the woodworking shop downstairs. The sound of the saw and the scent of fresh oak brought peace back into my soul. Sunday dinners returned to the backyard once again. The smell of grilled meat filled the air, while Leo's laughter rang across the lawn as he pushed his wooden train through the grass. David looked at me with deep regret in his eyes. "Dad," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for letting blindness cloud my judgment." I smiled and held my son's hand. "What matters is not how we fall," I told him. "What matters is how we rise together." I sat down one evening to write a new will. I still decided to leave a small trust for Samantha. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted her to have one real chance to rebuild her life after prison. I believe in mercy. True revenge is not destroying your enemy. It is living a happy life without allowing hatred to poison your heart. I watched Leo carefully holding the wooden train Samantha once wanted to throw away, and in that moment I understood a priceless truth. The richest person is not the one with the most money. It is the one surrounded by people who love them for who they truly are. Money can appear and disappear in an instant, but love, loyalty, and honor are treasures no amount of wealth can ever buy. My journey at the bank that day came to an end, but it also opened the door to a new chapter filled with hope for my family, and that is how I protected what mattered most. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. If this story helped you appreciate the value of family, share it with the people you love most. And do not forget us here at Dad's Real Life Revenge. I stood by the window looking up at the star-filled sky, and I knew that somewhere out there were still fathers suffering through injustice in silence. But remember this: the truth always finds a way to come into the light. Just one seat at the graduation ceremony showed me exactly where I stood in my own family. It began with a phone call I was never supposed to overhear, and ended with a silence so heavy it crushed everything inside me. For 17 years I had never missed a single milestone in Jasmine's life. Today was her graduation day at Howard University. I woke up at 5 in the morning. I carefully ironed my best shirt. I slowly tied the necktie Jasmine had given me for my birthday 3 years ago. I was proud. I was happy. I truly believed I was the luckiest father in the world. But my world collapsed, right there in the entrance hall. Diane walked toward me with a cold expression on her face. She would not even look me in the eyes. She handed me a small piece of paper and whispered in a quiet but merciless voice, "You should sit in the backup seats at the back. The front row belongs to Marcus. Jasmine needs graduation photos with her real father. Having you there would ruin the perfect family picture." Her words stabbed straight into my chest. I stood frozen among the crowd. I looked down at the ticket in my hand. Seat 15. The very last row. The place reserved for unwanted guests. The place hidden behind the bright stage lights. Up front, Jasmine was smiling brightly in her graduation gown. She threw her arms around Marcus, the man who had not paid a single dollar in child support for 17 years. The man who only showed up after all the hard work was already done. "Dad, I did it," Jasmine shouted happily. And she was not talking to me. I stood there, holding a bouquet of deep red roses. I had handpicked every single flower for my daughter. Without realizing it, I squeezed the stems tighter and tighter. Sharp thorns pierced deep into my skin. Warm blood trickled down, slowly, soaking through the silver wrapping paper. But that physical pain meant nothing compared to the humiliation tearing through my soul. Had I really spent my entire life raising a child with my own blood, sweat, and sacrifice, only to be treated like a stranger in the end? Welcome to Dad's Revenge Real Life. Don't forget to leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. You are going to love it here. Betrayal does not always come like a slap across the face. Sometimes it comes when the people you love ask you to step aside so someone else can enjoy the rewards of your sacrifice. I turned around and walked away. I left behind their fake laughter and hollow happiness. The thunderous applause echoing through the halls of Howard University sounded unbearable to my ears. I sat alone on an ice-cold stone bench outside the campus. The blood on my palms had already dried into dark stains. Memories from the last 17 years came flooding back like a slow-moving film, crushing my chest with every passing second. Jasmine was 7 years old that year. She came home sobbing because other children mocked her crooked teeth. Seeing my little girl cry tore me apart inside. Diane looked at me and sighed. Braces at that time cost more money than we could possibly afford. But I promised my daughter I would give her the best life I could. And I kept that promise. That was when my endless nights at the frozen warehouse began. My shift started at 10 at night and ended at 6 the next morning. I carried heavy boxes weighing dozens of pounds inside temperatures below freezing. My body trembled constantly. My fingers ached every time the weather changed. My back hurt so badly there were mornings when I could barely stand upright. But every month when I saw the savings growing little by little, I smiled. My love for this family was never built on sweet words. It was written in cold numbers on bank statements. Numbers bought with my sweat and blood. I denied myself everything so Diane and Jasmine could live comfortably and never feel inferior to anyone else. I believed my sacrifices were building a strong and loving home. But I was wrong. I was building a magnificent castle on sand. And sand always washes away. Today's betrayal was not sudden. It had been growing quietly for 17 years, fed by my own silence and tolerance. They had become so used to receiving my sacrifices that they no longer saw them as sacrifices at all. To them, my pain had become normal, expected. If you have ever felt taken for granted after giving someone everything, you had hit the like button. I slowly stood up. Then I threw the blood-stained bouquet of roses into a trash can beside the road. My patience had finally reached its limit. Did they really think I would continue sacrificing myself quietly in the shadows forever? No. My plan to reclaim justice began at that exact moment. The train of their perfect lives was about to crash downhill, the second the silent driver me finally let go of the wheel. I drove back to our house. My mind was completely numb, but my chest burned with rage. For 17 years I had lived inside a world built on cruel contradictions. I finally realized that I had only ever been the silent worker behind the curtain while someone else played the hero making empty promises. When Jasmine was 14, she dreamed of joining the city's professional ballet academy. The tuition for that prestigious arts program was outrageously expensive. Marcus showed up one evening carrying a bright red rose. He smiled confidently and promised Jasmine he would pay every cent of her tuition. Jasmine nearly exploded with happiness. She threw her arms around him, took pictures together, and posted them all over social media. Thousands of people liked the photo beneath the caption, "The best dad in the world." But 3 days later, the tuition bill arrived at our house. Marcus blocked Diane's phone number. Then he disappeared, without a trace. I was the one who quietly pushed my only motorcycle to a pawn shop and sold it to pay for Jasmine's classes. For an entire year, I walked to work through rain, snow, and freezing winds because I no longer had a vehicle. Jasmine never knew the truth. She still believed the money came from Marcus. And I stayed silent because I did not want to destroy the image of her biological father in her heart. My sacrifices had slowly turned me into air inside that house. And air is invisible. Nobody notices air until they start suffocating. Diane and Jasmine were always dazzled by Marcus's flashy promises and fake charm. They treated my sweat, exhaustion, and money as something ordinary, something expected. When Marcus bought a cheap bracelet, they treasured it like priceless gold. When I provided an entire stable life, they treated it as nothing more than the duty of a servant. This injustice had to end. Marcus's fake brilliance and their endless ingratitude had pushed me to the edge. They had no idea that the true face behind all those promises was about to be exposed in the most brutal way possible. And this was only the beginning. The breaking point came when Jasmine received her acceptance letter to Howard University. The tuition was an enormous burden. And just like every other time, Marcus appeared right on cue. He promised he would take care of everything. But 1 week before enrollment, he suddenly vanished again. He sent a short message claiming his investments had failed and that he was bankrupt. Jasmine cried until her eyes were swollen. Diane nearly lost her mind with panic. And once again I stepped in to carry the weight they could not bear. I made the decision to withdraw every dollar from the retirement fund I had spent half my life building. That money was supposed to protect me in old age. My hands trembled as I signed the withdrawal papers, but my heart felt strangely calm. I believed this sacrifice would finally prove the depth of my unconditional love. I believed they would finally understand who had truly stood beside them whenever storms came crashing down. I was wrong. That retirement fund bought me nothing except a betrayal so cruel it had been planned long before I ever discovered it. 1 week before the graduation ceremony, I came home earlier than usual because of severe back pain. The house was quiet. Then I heard whispers coming from the master bedroom. It was Diane. She was speaking to Marcus on the phone. I froze in the hallway outside the door. Diane lowered her voice and said softly, "Don't worry. Everything is going exactly as planned. Once Jasmine graduates, we can finally push that troublesome old man out of the family picture. Without his money, Jasmine never would have finished college anyway. But now she has a good job in the city. He's no longer useful to us." My entire body went numb. Then Diane continued, "We'll move into the new apartment Jasmine rented. You'll finally get to stand beside your daughter as the official father at all the high-class parties. And don't worry about this house. I'll force him to sign it over to me." Every word poured into my soul like freezing water. My ears rang. My heart stopped beating. The woman I had loved and protected for 17 years saw me as nothing more than a machine for money. They had waited for me to bleed myself dry so they could throw me away like a worthless rag the moment they no longer needed me. Do not scream so people can see your pain. Stand up and walk away the moment the graduation ceremony of exploitation begins. Hit like if you agree. That was the moment my patience finally died. The fragile contract called family had already been torn apart by their own hands. I did not cry. I smiled coldly in the darkness. They wanted to erase me from their perfect picture. Fine. But before I stepped out of that picture, I was going to burn the entire canvas to the ground. That night I began preparing a graduation gift that Diane, Jasmine, and Marcus would remember for the rest of their lives. I walked out of the halls of Howard University in complete silence. I did not wait for the graduation ceremony to end. I did not look back at their glowing smiles even once. That night I sat alone in my office. The room was completely dark. The pain inside me had disappeared. All that remained was a terrifying level of clarity. I picked up my phone and made 3 calls before dawn. The first call was to the property management company. I was the sole leaseholder for the luxury apartment Jasmine had rented downtown. In a cold and steady voice, I requested the immediate termination of the lease agreement. I agreed to forfeit the security deposit. The apartment would be reclaimed by the end of the month. Jasmine would no longer have a beautiful place to move into with her wonderful biological father. The second call was to the bank. I ordered every supplementary credit card belonging to Diane and Jasmine to be frozen immediately. For 17 years, they had used my money for designer clothes, luxury dinners, and glamorous lifestyles. As of tonight, that river of money had officially dried up. I was no longer the devoted husband. I was now a man, enforcing ownership over what belonged to him. The final call was to a real estate agency. The house we lived in had always belonged entirely to me long before the marriage. I instructed the agent to sell it immediately for 10% below market value. My only condition was speed. I wanted every legal procedure completed within 2 weeks. They thought I was just a foolish man who worked himself to death without asking questions. They believed they could drain every drop of my finances and casually throw me away afterward. They were wrong. I was the one who built their fake paradise with my own hands, and I could destroy it just as easily. This war had only begun, and they were still celebrating their victory, without realizing the ground beneath them was already collapsing. Tomorrow morning, when the sun rises, Diane and Jasmine will receive their first brutal slap from reality. Are you curious to see how they react when they realize the gold mine they despised has officially closed forever? Stay tuned for the next chapter to witness the full force of this reckoning. The next morning, Diane and Jasmine returned home just after sunrise. I was sitting calmly in the living room reading the newspaper and sipping a cup of bitter coffee. They walked inside, looking exhausted, but their smiles still filled the room. The moment Diane saw me, she started complaining. She grumbled that Marcus had once again forgotten his wallet during their celebration dinner at a 5-star restaurant the night before. Jasmine immediately defended her biological father. A great man like Marcus should not have to worry about petty money problems, she said proudly. I did not say a single word. I simply smiled. Their awakening began less than an hour later. On her way to work, Diane stopped at her usual Starbucks for one of her expensive coffees. Casually, she swiped the supplementary credit card I had given her years ago. Beep. The payment machine rejected it. The cashier gave her an awkward smile. I'm sorry, ma'am. Your card has been declined. Diane frowned in irritation and tried again. Declined. Again. This time, panic flashed across her face. Seconds later, my phone rang. The moment I answered, Diane exploded with fury. Lucas, what did you do to my account? Unlock the card. Right now I'm standing here humiliating myself in this coffee shop. My voice remained perfectly calm. There's nothing wrong with the card. I canceled it. Starting today, you can pay for your perfect little life yourselves. Then I hung up before she could scream another word. At the exact same time, Jasmine received an urgent email from the property management company. The message informed her that the lease for her luxury apartment had been terminated immediately. She was required to remove all her belongings before the 31st of the month. That was when real panic finally began spreading through both of them. For the first time in years, they realized the invisible support system surrounding their lives was disappearing piece by piece. The glamorous mask they wore so proudly was slowly being ripped away layer after layer. But this was only a light appetizer before the real punishment began. Tonight's confrontation at the dinner table would expose every ugly truth completely. Did they really believe they could corner me so easily? Then they should prepare themselves for the final audit from the man they once called the troublesome old burden. That night, the family dinner table turned into a cold execution chamber. Diane and Jasmine stormed into the house with fury burning across their faces. They slammed their hands onto the table and shouted directly at me. Have you lost your mind, Lucas? How dare you freeze our cards and cancel Jasmine's apartment? Do you have any idea how humiliated we were today? I did not flinch. Slowly, I pushed a thick stack of documents across the table toward them. It was the most detailed financial audit they had ever seen in their lives. I looked directly at Jasmine. My voice was as cold as ice. For 17 years, this is the exact amount I spent on both of you. $1,240,000. Your braces. Your ballet academy tuition. Your expensive education at Howard University. Every single dollar came from my sweat and blood. I leaned forward slightly. Marcus made promises. I was the one who carried them out. I was the one who emptied his retirement fund so you could hold your head high beside your wealthy classmates. And yet at your graduation yesterday, both of you pushed me to seat 15 in the back row so a man who contributed nothing could stand in the spotlight. Diane let out a mocking laugh. So now you're counting every penny you spent on your wife and daughter. That's pathetic. This house belongs to me too. You can't treat us like this. Without changing my expression, I pulled out one final document. The property ownership papers. And the completed sale agreement. I looked directly into Diane's eyes. This house was entirely mine before we got married. And I already sold it. You have exactly 2 weeks to remove every belonging you own. The new owner takes possession on the 15th. Jasmine suddenly burst into tears. She stared at me with shock, fear, and desperation in her eyes. Dad, are you throwing me away? Are you still my father? Slowly, I stood up. I looked at the daughter I had once loved more than my own life. Then I answered in a low but unshakable voice. I'm not throwing you away, Jasmine. I'm simply returning you to the place you chose for yourself. The front row beside your biological father. The room went silent. You already planned to erase me from your family picture after graduation. I'm only helping you do it a little sooner. Diane and Jasmine stood frozen in place. Their faces turned pale. Not a trace of color remained. The brutal truth had completely shattered the fantasy they had been living in. But the punishment was still far from over, because the real question had not been answered yet. What would happen when their beloved hero Marcus finally had to face? Diane completely lost control. She screamed hysterically and tore the audit papers into pieces, scattering them across the table like falling ashes. Then she unleashed the cruelest insults she could think of. You're a controlling monster, Lucas. You want to destroy your own daughter's future over a single seat. You're selfish. I watched the shredded papers drift through the air. Inside me, there was nothing left to shake. Diane's rage only proved one thing. They were terrified. Terrified of reality finally arriving at their doorstep. Without saying another word, I walked into my room and returned with the suitcase I had already packed. My voice was calm, cold, and final. You have exactly 2 weeks to leave this illusion behind. Move out willingly, or be forced out. Your choice. This house no longer has anything to do with me. Then I walked toward the front door. I did not look back at Jasmine's late tears, or Diane's violent outburst echoing behind me. The night air in Annapolis was cold and fierce. I walked slowly down the familiar street leading toward the main road. And there, beneath the dim glow of a streetlight, I saw Marcus's polished luxury car parked at the corner. Marcus leaned casually against it, scrolling through his phone with a smug smile on his face. Maybe he was waiting for Diane to bring him the good news about the house transfer. Or maybe he was fantasizing about his glamorous future, beside a Howard University graduate daughter he had never spent a single dollar raising. This time I walked directly toward him first. The moment Marcus saw the suitcase in my hand, he straightened up nervously. I looked directly into the calculating eyes of the man who had betrayed me for 17 years. Then I smiled. The bill for your perfect family is finally coming due, Marcus. His expression instantly changed. The house is sold. The bank accounts are frozen. Jasmine's apartment is gone too. So starting tomorrow, you'll be the one paying for their glamorous lifestyle. I adjusted my grip on the suitcase and stepped closer. Good luck. Marcus's confident expression collapsed into pure shock. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I turned around and walked away without waiting for a response. The game of switched roles was finally complete. Now the man who made promises would have to carry the full weight of two ungrateful people with empty pockets. And without my money holding everything together, the true nature of their parasitic relationship would finally be exposed. The next 6 months would become a living hell that stripped every layer of fake love away one by one. How long do you think Marcus will stay loyal once the gold mine disappears forever? 6 months passed quickly. I moved to Annapolis and settled into a quiet little coastal town. I bought an old woodworking shop and started over from scratch. There were no more complaints from Diane. No more crushing financial pressure. My hands were now covered with sawdust paint stains and rough calluses from carving wood instead of bleeding from rose thorns. For the first time in many years, my soul finally found peace. Late one evening, my phone vibrated softly. A text message appeared from an unfamiliar number, but I immediately knew who it was. Jasmine. She sent me a screenshot of a bank transfer. $500. Below it was a short message. Dad, this is my first paycheck. I'm sending you a small part of it to repay what I owe you. I'm sorry for everything that happened. I hope you stay healthy. I stared silently at the screen for a long time. Surprisingly, I felt no hatred, no triumph either, only a strange sense of calm. For the first time in her life, Jasmine had begun to understand the value of hard work. She finally understood what it meant to earn money with sacrifice and exhaustion instead of taking it for granted. Through a few old acquaintances, I eventually learned what happened after I left. The truth revealed itself almost immediately. Just as I predicted, Marcus abandoned Diane within the very first week, after discovering she no longer had a house savings or financial security. He disappeared as quickly as he had once appeared. Marcus never wanted responsibility. He only loved comfort funded by someone else. Diane and Jasmine were forced to rent a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city. For the first time in years, they had to face rent payments, utility bills, groceries, and financial stress completely on their own. But the greatest punishment was never poverty. The greatest punishment was forcing them to face reality without my silent protection standing behind them. Only after the glamorous curtain finally fell did they realize the man they looked down on had been the very person keeping them from collapsing into the abyss. Every debt of loyalty and betrayal had finally been settled. But my story does not end with revenge. Because inside this small woodworking shop lies the most important lesson I want to leave behind for all of you. Stay with me for the final reflections, because if you are also living through injustice, abandonment, or silent sacrifice, you may discover the path that finally sets you free. The soft scent of pine wood drifted through my small woodworking shop in Annapolis. The golden evening sunlight stretched across the handcrafted benches I had built with my own hands. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and quietly admired my work. After 17 long years, my journey had finally ended in a silence filled with dignity. I may have lost a fake family, but I finally found myself again. Standing inside this workshop, I learned 3 painful lessons about life. The first lesson is about self-worth. Never measure your value based on the approval of ungrateful people. The second lesson is about respect. Love without respect is nothing more than a cruel form of emotional parasitism. And the final lesson is about kindness. Never allow your kindness to become an unlimited free service. The more easily you sacrifice yourself, the more people begin to treat your pain as your obligation. I looked at the simple wooden chair I had just finished building. It stood firm and strong. It was not sitting in seat 15 behind anyone else's spotlight. It belonged on a stage built by my own hands. If people refuse to give you the seat you deserve, then build your own stage. Do not beg for pity. Do not tolerate humiliation just to preserve the illusion of a happy family. My story is a warning to everyone, silently sacrificing themselves in the dark. Your silence does not make selfish people grateful. It only feeds their greed. Be brave enough to walk away once your limits have been crossed. Join our community by hitting the like button and subscribing for more real, emotional, and hard-hitting family stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this space. I turned off the lights and closed the door to the workshop behind me. The streets of Annapolis were glowing beneath the night sky. And for the first time in many years, I walked forward feeling completely free. My real life was only beginning now. I once thought I had seen the full extent of human cruelty after 31 years on the federal bench. I was wrong. It all began with a phone call at 6:47 in the morning. On the other end of the line was the sound of my daughter Claire sobbing uncontrollably. Through choking tears, Claire said, "I was in an accident, Dad. My husband pushed me. I lost the baby." It felt as though the world collapsed beneath my feet. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered across the floor. My grandchild was only 7 months old in the womb. The poor child never even had the chance to see the sunlight. My Claire was lying in a hospital bed suffering. Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. Grab a glass of water, some snacks, make yourself comfortable, and remember this: the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose otherwise. Leave a number 1 in the comments so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one. That morning in Asheville was strangely peaceful. Mist still drifted among the old pine trees. I was sitting on the porch with a hot cup of coffee. Life as a retired judge was supposed to pass quietly like that. But then the phone began ringing relentlessly. The sound shattered the silence. It signaled the arrival of a terrible storm. The shock quickly transformed into a burning fury. But it was not a reckless rage. It was the cold, clear-headed anger of a father, a man who had spent half his life defending the law. Daniel Voss, the name of my glamorous son-in-law, the wealthy CEO who never stopped preaching about morality. He was the one who did this. He had mercilessly pushed his wife down the stairs. He had killed his own flesh and blood. His cruelty went beyond every limit of human decency. I rushed to my car in a state of intense focus. My mind worked like a machine. During my years in the judiciary, I had faced thousands of criminals. I knew how to deal with people who believed they were above the law. The Voss family had money and power. They thought they could hide any crime. They thought they could use money to silence everyone. They were wrong. They forgot one important thing. They had just harmed the daughter of a federal judge. I would not allow my daughter to endure this injustice alone. A battle for justice and accountability officially began at that very moment. I would tear away Daniel Voss's mask before the entire world. He would pay for what he had done. As my car sped through the fog, the face of Daniel Voss filled my mind. A man so perfect it was unsettling. Handsome, successful, and born into a notorious billionaire dynasty, he was the CEO of a major financial corporation. My daughter Claire, an intelligent woman with a successful career of her own, had been blinded by that aura. She truly believed she had found the man of her dreams. I, however, felt differently. After 31 years on the federal bench, I had learned how to see beneath the surface. I never trusted that son-in-law of mine. From the very first family gathering where I met him, I sensed something was wrong. When Daniel looked at Claire, I did not see the eyes of a man in love. I saw the eyes of a predator. A sickening sense of possession was evident in every gesture. He wanted to control Claire. He viewed my daughter as nothing more than an expensive ornament to enhance his image of perfection. The arrogance of the Voss family ran in their blood. They looked at the world through the eyes of those who believed they were entitled to decide everyone else's fate. To them, money could buy anything. The law was merely a toy for the poor. Jeffrey Voss Daniel's father was a seasoned fox in the business world. He had taught his son that nothing mattered more than the interests of the family. No one, not even a wife or child, was allowed to stand in their way. When Claire became pregnant, I thought the arrival of a child might soften that cold-hearted man. My daughter was so happy. She counted the days until she could welcome her first child into the world. The baby, 7 months along, was growing strong and healthy. That child was the hope of our entire family. But to the Voss family, the baby seemed to be a threat to the enormous fortune they controlled. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. A cold fury surged through my chest. My poor Claire had been living with a devil wearing the mask of an angel. She had been far too innocent to see through the promises and declarations of love. She had no idea that behind the grand doors of the Vale mansion a dark conspiracy was taking shape, a conspiracy so sinister that even in her worst nightmares she could never have imagined it. My car was approaching the hospital. The constant wail of ambulance sirens made the atmosphere even more suffocating. I knew I had to remain strong for my daughter. But one question kept drilling deeper into my mind. Why would a husband be so cruel to his pregnant wife? What had happened behind the veil of secrecy at the Vale mansion that night? What earth-shattering secret had my daughter accidentally overheard from Daniel and his father that made them determined to eliminate that innocent child at any cost? I walked into the hospital room with a heavy heart. Claire lay there, her face pale and drained of all color. Her swollen, lifeless eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. When she saw me, tears began streaming down her cheeks again. I wrapped my arms around her trembling, fragile shoulders. I listened in silence. I let her tell me the entire dark truth hidden behind the walls of the Vale mansion. It had all begun the night before. Claire had gone downstairs to get a glass of warm water. As she passed the study, she noticed the light was still on. Heated voices were coming from inside. It was Daniel and his father, Jeffrey Voss. She was about to walk in when she froze after hearing the words trust fund. Something in her instincts told her that something was wrong. She quietly stood behind the thick wooden door and began listening. The words spoken by those two men sent a chill down Claire's spine. Jeffrey Voss was furious. He slammed his hand on the desk and began talking about an inheritance clause in the family trust. It turned out that if the child in Claire's womb was born, 1/3 of the family fortune and corporate control would automatically be transferred into the child's name. That would mean Jeffrey's absolute authority would be weakened. He could not accept that. He viewed his unborn grandchild as a threat. Daniel did not object. He agreed with his father. The words Claire repeated to me filled me with overwhelming rage. He said the child had come at the wrong time. He viewed his own flesh and blood as a problem that needed to be solved in order to maintain control of the money. The two of them calmly discussed ways to delay the birth or find legal grounds to strip the child of inheritance rights. Their lack of humanity was horrifying. They possessed not a shred of compassion. All they saw were numbers and checks. Claire stood frozen in place. Her entire body felt weak. The 7-month-old baby gently moved inside her womb, as though seeking protection from its mother. Yet its father and grandfather were treating it like an obstacle that needed to be removed. The betrayal was too great. It was more than any woman could bear. I could feel my blood boiling as I listened. The moral decay of the wealthy Voss family was fully exposed. They were willing to sacrifice anything to protect their throne of wealth and power. Claire's voice broke into silent sobs as she reached this part of the story. She decided she could not remain silent. She pushed open the door and stepped inside to confront her husband. But she had no idea that this courageous act would place her directly in danger. How did Daniel Voss's perfect mask finally shatter when his wife exposed him? When the study door burst open, Daniel turned around. Claire stood there, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes burned with fury. Through her pain, she screamed, demanding to know how he could be so cruel to his own child. Jeffrey Voss remained silent. He stepped back and watched coldly. As for Daniel, the perfect husband, everyone knew he suddenly transformed completely. Claire's description of that moment sent chills down my spine. There was not a trace of emotion left on his face. The warm eyes she saw every day had become two hollow, lifeless pits. The perfect mask fell away, revealing a cold-blooded monster underneath. He took slow steps toward Claire. No explanation. No remorse. He looked at her only as an enemy who possessed a secret that could destroy him. In a low, threatening voice, he growled, "You were never supposed to hear any of this." Terrified, Claire backed away. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, protecting her 7-month-old baby. He forced her all the way into the hallway, right to the edge of the steep staircase. His greed had driven him beyond reason. Daniel struck. He shoved Claire hard in the shoulder. A brutal, deliberate push. She tumbled down the unforgiving stone steps. Claire's desperate screams echoed throughout the grand yet cold Vale mansion. He stood at the top of the staircase and watched his wife fall without making the slightest attempt to help her. By that point, I could no longer contain myself. I gripped my daughter's ice-cold hand. The cold fury inside me reached its peak. I looked directly into Claire's eyes. I did not tell her that everything would be all right the way weaker fathers often do. I was a judge. I knew nothing would ever be all right as long as the criminal remained free. I leaned close to her ear and made a solemn vow. "I promise you this Daniel Voss will pay with both his reputation and his life as he knows it. I will bring justice back for my grandchild." I stood up and walked out of the hospital room. Grief had now given way to a flawless battle plan. My opponent was a massive financial empire. They had money connections and the finest lawyers available to twist the truth. But they had underestimated a father driven by vengeance. I knew exactly what I had to do. I picked up my phone and began activating my network. What secret cards was federal judge Richard Harmon about to reveal in his battle against the Voss family? I walked down the hospital corridor. The sound of my solitary footsteps echoed steadily. My anger transformed into something cold and razor-sharp. My opponents were powerful. The Voss family controlled enormous resources. They could bribe witnesses. They could destroy evidence. But they had made one fatal mistake. They believed I was nothing more than a retired old man. I stopped at the far end of the hallway and dialed the first number. Sandra Chen, the finest attorney in the region. She had once been my student. I briefly explained Claire's situation. No lengthy explanation was necessary. Sandra immediately understood her assignment. She would send an emergency preservation notice to the Vale mansion at once. A strict legal hold would prevent the Voss family from tampering with the scene. Every security camera, every phone record, and every piece of evidence had to be preserved. But the legal battle was only half the war. To bring down an empire, I needed the truths they had buried. I dialed the second number. This call was for my brother Thomas Harmon. Thomas was a veteran and a former FBI investigator specializing in financial crimes. He was a ghost in every sense of the word. A man who operated in the shadows and always uncovered what others desperately tried to hide. The Voss family had absolutely no idea Thomas even existed within my circle. I spoke into the phone. "Daniel killed our grandchild. I need you to uncover every stain on his name." There was silence on the other end for several seconds. I could hear my brother drawing a deep breath filled with fury. Thomas replied with only a single sentence. "Give me 72 hours. The hidden battlefield had been established. Some of the sharpest minds in law and investigation were now in position. We would not confront the Voss family with brute force. We would tighten the noose around their necks with evidence they could never deny. That night, the hunt began. Thomas traveled all the way to Chicago, where Daniel had built his career before marrying Claire. What horrifying secrets would the former FBI investigator uncover in the past of this seemingly perfect CEO? The next 72 hours felt like an eternity. I remained by Claire's hospital bed the entire time. Watching my daughter suffer both physically and emotionally tore at my heart. But I knew I could not afford to break. With each passing hour, Thomas sent me updates. His relentless investigation in Chicago had begun peeling away Daniel Voss's carefully crafted facade. It turned out that pushing Claire down the stairs was not the first time this man had used violence to solve his problems. Thomas uncovered a sealed file dating back 5 years. In Chicago, a female employee had once accused Daniel of assault. She had been forced into silence with a settlement worth millions of dollars. The Voss family had used its influence to erase every trace of the incident from the media. They had turned the victim into a liar. Daniel Voss was a systematic predator, He always used money to silence anyone who stood in his way. But this time, his target was my daughter. The Voss family's protection had created a monster that feared nothing. Yet the biggest breakthrough was not in Chicago. It was inside the Vale mansion itself, where Claire had been attacked. Under the cover of a maintenance technician, Thomas gained access to the building's network. There, he discovered a secret that even the Voss father and son had forgotten. Jeffrey Voss, a man who trusted no one, had installed a hidden audio recording system in every executive office 15 years earlier. He had originally done it to monitor business partners, and even his own son. But as the years passed and his confidence in his power grew, Jeffrey had completely forgotten the system existed. The aging equipment had continued operating silently in the shadows. It recorded every sound and every conversation that took place inside that fateful room. Thomas successfully extracted all the data from the night of the incident. The original audio file was protected by an outdated encryption algorithm. For a former FBI specialist like Thomas, breaking it was only a matter of time. I received his message when the clock struck 3 in the morning. It contained only 4 words. I got the evidence. I stared out the hospital window. Dawn was approaching. The silence I had maintained for days was about to end. The legal noose was ready. How horrifying were the cold, unfiltered words spoken by Jeffrey and Daniel Voss on that hidden recording. Would the Voss empire realize before it was too late that they had personally tied the very noose that was now tightening around their own necks? The arrest warrant for Daniel Voss was issued late one afternoon. Police stormed the Vale mansion while the Voss father and son were having dinner. Jeffrey Voss showed no sign of panic. He calmly rose from his chair. The arrogance of a man who ruled an empire was written across his face. He looked at the officers and scoffed. He called the entire situation a ridiculous misunderstanding. Jeffrey believed that power and his team of multi-million-dollar attorneys would easily save his son. They thought they could twist the truth the way they always had. If you've followed the story this far, then you're probably finding it interesting. Please do us a quick favor, like and subscribe. Leave a number 5 in the comments so I know you've made it this far, and share your prediction for how the story will end to see whether you're right. Many people watch without doing that, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. The Voss family's confidence rested on one assumption: the staircase scene had been thoroughly cleaned. There were no witnesses. There were no direct security cameras. Daniel Voss stood behind his father with a smug smile. He believed Claire's testimony alone would be crushed in court. He thought I was nothing more than a helpless father making a desperate attempt to fight back. But my satisfaction began the moment Thomas walked into the interrogation room. In his hand was a black hard drive. Thomas looked directly into Jeffrey Voss's eyes and pressed play. The recording lasted exactly 43 minutes. An original digital audio file that could not be forged. Thomas had uncovered 43 minutes of recorded evidence detailing the conspiracy to eliminate the unborn child. Jeffrey's voice came through clearly. We need to deal with the baby before it affects the trust. Then Daniel's voice followed. I'll take care of it. An accident will be the cleanest solution. The color immediately drained from Jeffrey Voss's face before turning a sickly gray. Daniel's triumphant smile froze on his polished face. The noose had tightened. At that moment, all the money and influence in the world became worthless in the face of such overwhelming evidence. For the first time, both father and son realized they had walked straight into a trap from which there was no escape. The federal courtroom was packed that day. The atmosphere was so solemn and suffocating that every anxious breath seemed audible. Reporters crowded the hallways outside. Everyone wanted to witness the downfall of one of the most powerful families in the country. Daniel Voss sat at the defense table. His expensive suit could no longer conceal his unease. The confidence he carried every day had completely vanished. In its place was overwhelming fear. Claire stood before the court as both a witness and a victim. She had lost weight, but the strength had returned to her eyes. I was not seated on the judge's bench that day. Instead, I sat in the gallery right beside my daughter. I was there not as a powerful federal judge. I was there as a father protecting his child. I wanted Daniel Voss to see that I would be the strongest wall standing behind Claire. Attorney Sandra Chen rose to her feet. She began presenting the facts of the case with her usual precision and sharpness. When Daniel attempted to deny every accusation, Sandra calmly requested permission to introduce the classified evidence. The judge nodded in approval. The courtroom audio system came to life. A suffocating silence fell across the entire courtroom as the recording began to play. Jeffrey Voss's cold, ruthless voice echoed through the chamber. Then came Daniel's chilling response about arranging a clean accident. The naked truth spoken by the Voss father and son cut through the silence like blades. Murmurs spread throughout the courtroom. People shook their heads in disbelief. Furious eyes turned toward the two men responsible for the crime. Daniel Voss lowered his head onto the table. He could not bring himself to look at anyone. The 43-minute recording completely stripped away the mask of the polished CEO. It exposed the monster underneath for everyone to see. The truth had been revealed beyond any possibility of denial. No amount of money, and not even the most expensive lawyers in the world, could save them now. The presiding judge's gavel struck with a sharp crack. The sound was like thunder, ending a long season of darkness. The entire courtroom held its breath. Daniel Voss rose to his feet, his legs trembling beneath him. The arrogance he once carried had completely vanished. In its place stood a condemned man awaiting the final judgment of justice. The judge began reading the sentence. Each word rang through the courtroom with unmistakable force. Daniel Voss was sentenced to 18 years in prison for aggravated assault and conspiracy to harm an unborn child. Jeffrey Voss, the architect behind the scheme, received a 6-year federal sentence for aiding the crime and concealing criminal conduct. 18 years and 6 years. That was the price they would pay with their freedom for valuing wealth above human life. A deep sense of satisfaction filled my chest as I watched the handcuffs snap around Daniel's wrists. He looked toward Claire and me with pleading eyes. But it was far too late. Justice had been carried out completely. This victory required no violence. It was built through perseverance, truth, and respect for the law. Yet the downfall of the Voss family did not end behind prison walls. The verdict triggered a chain reaction that destroyed the entire family legacy. Shares of Voss Financial collapsed immediately after the trial. Business partners rushed to distance themselves from the company. The most symbolic moment came a week later. The Voss family name was officially removed from the City Art Museum's Wall of Honor. It was the complete collapse of people who once believed they were untouchable. Money could not purchase honor once that honor had been stained by the blood of the innocent. I held Claire tightly as the courtroom slowly emptied. She cried, but this time they were tears of relief. The battle that had lasted 14 long months was finally over. The Voss Empire had become nothing more than a dark chapter of the past. Yet when the fire of vengeance finally faded, I discovered an unexpected emptiness within myself. The tragedy had left deep emotional scars on both of us. After exposing the crimes of others, I realized that healing would be our next challenge. Several weeks later, Claire and I sat together on the porch of my home in Asheville. The same pine trees swayed gently in the breeze. The evening sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and amber. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "Dad, do you think they were always evil?" I looked out toward the horizon before answering. "No. I think they spent so much time chasing power that they forgot what power was supposed to be for." Claire lowered her eyes. "They had everything." "Yes," I replied softly. "And that was the problem. They believed having everything entitled them to do anything." The wind rustled through the trees. I placed my hand over hers. "Power is a tool, Claire. It can build a family, protect people, and create opportunities. But when power becomes more important than people, it turns into a weapon. That's what destroyed them." She nodded slowly. "And what about us?" I smiled for the first time in many months. "We keep living. We honor those we lost by refusing to become like the people who hurt us." Tears formed in her eyes once more, but this time there was peace in them. That evening, neither of us spoke much after that. We simply sat together and watched the sun disappear beyond the mountains. For 31 years, I had believed that justice was about verdicts, sentences, and courtrooms. I was wrong. Justice is only the beginning. The harder task is learning how to heal after the truth has finally been revealed. And sometimes the greatest victory is not bringing down an empire. Sometimes it is helping the people you love find the strength to smile again. The presiding judge's gavel struck with a sharp crack. The sound was like thunder bringing an end to a long season of darkness. The entire courtroom held its breath. Daniel Voss rose to his feet, his legs trembling beneath him. The arrogance he once carried had completely disappeared. In its place was the face of a condemned man awaiting judgment from justice itself. The judge began reading the sentence. Each word echoed through the courtroom with unmistakable force. Daniel Voss was sentenced to 18 years in prison for aggravated assault and conspiracy to kill an unborn child. Jeffrey Voss, the mastermind behind the scheme, received a 6-year federal prison sentence for aiding the crime and concealing criminal conduct. 18 years and 6 years, that was the price they would pay with their freedom for valuing wealth above human life. A deep sense of satisfaction surged through me as I watched the handcuffs snap around Daniel's wrists. He looked toward Claire and me with pleading eyes. But it was far too late. Justice had been carried out completely. This sweet revenge required no violence. It was built through perseverance and respect for the rule of law. Yet the downfall of the Voss family did not end behind prison walls. The ripple effects of the verdict destroyed the entire family legacy. Shares of Voss Financial plummeted immediately after the trial. Business partners rushed to distance themselves from the company. The most symbolic moment came a week later. The Voss family name was officially chiseled away and removed from the City Art Museum's Wall of Honor. It was the complete collapse of people who once believed they were untouchable. Money could not buy honor once it had been stained by the blood of the innocent. I held Claire tightly as people gradually left the courtroom. She cried, but this time they were tears of relief. The battle that had lasted 14 long months was finally over. The Voss empire had faded into a dark chapter of the past. Yet when the fire of vengeance finally cooled, I discovered a great silence within my soul. The tragedy had left deep emotional scars on both of us. After exposing the crimes of others, how would an old judge like me help my daughter continue the journey toward healing? What lesson about power would emerge from our final conversation together? Claire and I returned to our small home in Asheville. The fog had lifted. Warm sunlight filtered through the old pine trees. We sat together on the porch. 2 cups of hot tea released gentle streams of steam into the morning air. After 14 long months, I finally saw my daughter smile again. It was a smile of relief and peace. I looked at Claire and reflected on everything that had happened. This legal system can sometimes be unfair to those without money. People like the Voss family always believe they can build walls of protection out of wealth and influence. But they were wrong. Never underestimate the silence of people who understand the truth. Power and money may hide wrongdoing for a time, but the kindness, wisdom, and persistence of someone who genuinely cares will always find a crack through which the truth can emerge. Justice may arrive late, but it is unavoidable. Blind arrogance will always lead to ruin. Claire's emotional wounds would take time to heal, but she was ready to move forward. The ordeal had made her far stronger than before. Thank you for staying with Dad's Real Life Revenge until the end of this story. Join our community by hitting the like button and subscribing to enjoy more gripping and realistic family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this space.